Under the dying lights of Spielberg, when the cameras were packing up and the world thought the day was over, Pecco Bagnaia said something that froze the air. It wasn't loud, but it struck like thunder in a whisper. Sometimes, he murmured in Italian to a journalist from Sky Sport, you feel the bike thinking before you do, and that's when you stop being the rider. His eyes didn't blink when he said it. Those words, lost in translation for a moment, became the pulse of an entire season, a confession that the reigning world champion had reached the edge where instinct ends and machine begins. Ducati's GP25, the most advanced motorcycle ever built, now feels more like an opponent than an ally, and Pecco, the man who once made it dance, is fighting ghosts inside its code. In 2025, the Red Beast no longer answers to emotion, it answers to data. But when the man who built his legacy on control admits he's lost the feel, the question becomes unbearable. Can a rider still lead when the bike refuses to follow? Behind that single interview hides the fracture of a champion, a war between sensation and simulation, courage and algorithm, and one truth too dangerous to ignore. Something inside Ducati's empire is breaking, and it starts with a man who once ruled it. And that's where it all began, in a single reckless heartbeat at 320 kilometers per hour, when Pecco Bagnaia did the unthinkable and turned off the very intelligence that was supposed to save him. He was already on the limit, eyes dry behind the visor, the straight of Misano vibrating like a living wire beneath the tires when Pecco Bagnaia did the unthinkable. He reached for the selector on the left handlebar and silenced the electronics that ruled his destiny. The telemetry would later reveal it, traction control off, full power unleashed at 320 kilometers per hour, a gesture as irrational as it was human. The Ducati GP25 twitched, a wild creature suddenly aware of its own heartbeat. For a second, the rear tire spun faster than thought, spraying invisible dusts of burned rubber into the air. Inside his helmet, Pecco whispered to himself, if she doesn't listen to me, then I'll make her hear my voice. It wasn't rebellion. It was a plea. At least when I turn the electronics off, I feel alive, he told the journalists later, but those who were there swear his tone wasn't pride. It was sorrow disguised as courage. The engineers froze in the box, staring at data lines that broke like heartbeats gone astray. Ducati had spent millions creating a predictive algorithm called anti-panic mode, capable of preventing tire slip by anticipating torque variations in 0.003 seconds. Bagnaia just erased it with a flick of his thumb. The crowd never noticed. They saw a flash of red, not a man detaching himself from the machine that once made him world champion. The bike shook, the sensors screamed, but he didn't back off. In that vibration, in that chaos of pure mechanics, he rediscovered a language older than telemetry, the dialogue between skin and steel. The GP25 became less precise, more real. It moved like a heartbeat under anesthesia that suddenly wakes up. He felt the rear wheel slide, a brief kiss with the abyss, and for a heartbeat, the asphalt became liquid. Mi estio adattando ma ogni giro che passo a cambiare setting a un giro and meno che passo a correre, he had said to his team earlier that weekend, and now he proved it, running not for time but for truth. The metaphor was brutal, a violinist breaking one string mid-performance, continuing to play because silence would hurt more. From the pit wall, the technician shouted his sector times, unaware that he was chasing something the stopwatch couldn't measure. The climax arrived when he exited turn 11, full throttle, no safety net, body aligned with destiny. The GP25 wobbled, recovered, screamed, alive. And Pecco, chest tight, eyes burning, realized that for the first time in months, he was riding, not calculating. The rebellion wasn't against Ducati, nor against technology. It was against the void between man and machine. He crossed the finish line with no victory, no podium, but with something far rarer, the sensation of being again what he was meant to be. In the silence of the garage, surrounded by cables and blinking sensors, he removed his gloves and stared at his trembling hands. At least for a few seconds, she remembered my touch. That night, the world called it madness. He called it freedom. There was a strange stillness in the Ducati box that evening, the kind that descends after data reveals a truth no one wants to face. Pecco Bagnaia sat on the edge of the pit counter, staring at a monitor glowing with endless graphs, curves of torque and traction, a digital map of a soul that was no longer his. The GP25 thinks too much, he finally said, half to himself, half to the void that hummed around him. The engineers exchanged silent glances. They all knew he wasn't exaggerating. The new Ducati's electronic brain, a cluster of microprocessors known internally as Project Gaia, predicts grip loss before it happens, adjusting engine delivery 400 times per second. But in doing so, it steals the pulse from the rider's hands. The machine breathes through equations, not instincts. When the bike doesn't listen to you, you're alone, he whispered again, softer this time, as if the walls could betray him. His inner monologue echoed louder than the fans outside. I used to command her. Now she anticipates me like a stranger, guessing my fears. The paradox was unbearable. Perfection had become distance. The Ducati GP25 no longer reacted to mistakes. It avoided them before they existed, turning every lap into an act of supervised precision. In that perfection, Pecco felt his humanity erode one algorithm at a time. Riding had become surgery. The vibrations through the handlebars were filtered, the throttle too clean, the feedback delayed by milliseconds that felt eternal. She hesitates when I dare, he said during debrief, and those words cut deeper than any telemetry. On the track, he could feel the system correcting his soul, trimming the chaos that once made him fast. The metaphor came to him mid-lap. It's like dancing with someone who knows your steps better than you do, until you realize you're not dancing anymore. The journalists later wrote about software updates and firmware bugs, but the truth was simpler. The GP25 had evolved beyond emotion. Bagnaia's style, built on intuition and the subtle art of imperfection, collided with the logic of silicon. The bike was faster, yes, but soulless, like a violin that plays itself. At 300 kilometers per hour, he no longer felt the bite of the rear, only a whisper of prediction correcting his courage. Each corner became a negotiation, not a conversation. Inside, a voice murmured, maybe she's not mine anymore. The climax came at turn 7 in Spielberg, when the GP25 refused to slide, a tiny act of obedience that felt like betrayal. He finished the lap, silent, mechanical cold. Later, in a motorhome, he removed his leathers and looked at his reflection in the window, half man, half algorithm. She rides me now, he said, and the sentence fell heavy as metal on marble. The next day, Ducati's engineers released a new firmware patch. Pecco didn't ask what had changed. He already knew. The machine was thinking again. It happened in the narrow space between exhaustion and lucidity, where words slip out before pride can stop them. The race was over, the air in Spielberg thick with burnt rubber and disbelief, when Pecco Bagnaia took off his helmet and let silence speak first. The microphones caught the tremor in his voice before the words themselves. We have to be realistic. It's hard to fight Marc in these conditions. No headline could soften it. That was the sound of a champion admitting defeat to a mirror that reflected someone else's glory. Marc Márquez had taken the same Ducati, same tires, same electronics, and bent them to his will like a craftsman shaping molten steel. Pecco's engineers replayed the telemetry and found the truth in numbers. Márquez braked 6 meters later, held 7 degrees more lean angle, and opened throttle 0.2 seconds earlier. The data was an autopsy. He rides my ghost, Bagnaia thought, watching the traces overlap in cruel symmetry. Marc hasn't just taken the Ducati, he told his crew chief. He's dominated it. It wasn't anger that filled his tone, but a weary awe, the kind reserved for forces of nature. The GP25 had chosen its prophet. It wasn't him. His internal monologue spiraled. I built this bike with sweat, and now she kneels for someone else. He still remembered 2022, when his braking zones were sacred ground. Now, Márquez was riding over them in ink too dark to erase. The metaphor felt sharp and slow, like seeing your own handwriting corrected by another hand. Ducati's paddock, usually electric with confidence, fell quiet. Engineers murmured about riding styles, lateral load transfers, and Márquez's uncanny feel for side grip traction. They missed the bigger tragedy. Pecco wasn't losing time, he was losing faith. On track, he still fought, but his lines lacked conviction, like sentences recited without belief. We'll find a way, someone said behind him, but he only nodded, knowing that the solution wasn't in the data. The GP25's balance favored aggression, and Pecco's smoothness had turned from strength to flaw. In Austria's fading light, the cameras caught him staring at the pit wall, expression unreadable, while Márquez laughed 2 boxes away. He makes her dance where I make her think, Pecco murmured, the sentence half poetry, half confession. The climax came not on track, but in that interview corner where the lights blinded him and the truth finally surfaced. It's difficult to fight Marc in these conditions, he repeated, slower this time, each syllable a cut. The journalists leaned forward, hungry, sensing history. The world saw resignation. But those who knew him saw something else, a split second before transformation. Because in that admission, Pecco Bagnaia stopped defending the past and began confronting what he had become. The crown wasn't lost yet, but it no longer glittered. It burned. There was a time when Pecco Bagnaia and his Ducati were a single, seamless line, man and machine breathing in unison, slicing air and asphalt with divine precision. Now that rhythm is broken, replaced by friction that feels almost personal. The GP25, once his faithful weapon, has become a creature of logic and restraint, armored with aerodynamic fins that promise stability but steal sensation. She used to be my weapon, he confessed quietly in the debrief. Now she resists me. The engineers nodded, though none dared meet his eyes. The new chassis, designed with asymmetric carbon layering for improved torsional rigidity, gave others confidence but trapped him in its geometry. It cornered too flat, too obedient, like a sword dulled by its own perfection. Why does she push back when I try to lead? He wondered, staring at the telemetry that looked more like a confession than a report. The aerodynamic package redistributed load toward the front, killing the gentle drift of the rear wheel that once guided him through chaos. The GP25 was no longer his accomplice. It was an analyst, dissecting his instincts one curve at a time. "You're fighting her," murmured Gigi Dallegna, studying the screen. Pecco's jaw tightened. "No, she's fighting me." On track, every correction felt heavier, each lean more hesitant, the front end too grounded, refusing to breathe. The metaphor came naturally. It's like dancing with someone who anticipates your step, then refuses to follow. His hands, once extensions of Ducati's will, now wrestled against subtle resistance, like static between frequencies. The data team called it optimization. Pecco called it exile. When the new aero fairing locked the airflow through turn 9, he felt the front bite too soon, forcing a correction that shattered his rhythm. He returned to the box drenched in sweat, helmet still on, voice low. "I can't feel her anymore." Those words weren't technical, they were elegy. Every world champion fears the day his creation stops responding, when engineering overtakes emotion. "We made her perfect," an engineer whispered. Then we lost him. The GP25's balance, intended for stability at full lean, denied him the chaos he once controlled. Onboard footage showed his throttle softer, slower, uncertain. He didn't trust her. "She moves like a stranger sleeping in my bed," he thought. And for the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. The climax came at Barcelona's turn 10, when a subtle aero stall lifted the front mid-corner, and Pecco's instinct clashed with physics. He saved it, but the gesture looked desperate, not brilliant. In that moment, every spectator saw the fracture that data could not quantify, a champion betrayed by his own masterpiece. When he returned to the garage, he touched the bike's carbon skin, the same way one touches something once sacred. "She's not mine anymore," he said softly, as the lights flickered on the pit wall. And for the first time, Ducati's greatest rider looked like the loneliest man in the world. The numbers didn't lie, though Pecco Bagnaia wished they did. Same Ducati GP25, same Michelin tires, same control software. Yet Marc Márquez extracted something supernatural from the machine, a pulse that seemed coded to his own DNA. "He bends it to his will," Pecco said in a low voice that mixed disbelief with reluctant admiration. The engineers tried to rationalize it: different corner entry velocity, distinct load transfer timing, a more aggressive body shift in mid-lean. But what Márquez did went beyond geometry. He rides her like she was waiting for him all along, Pecco thought, watching the onboard replay, where Marc drifted through turn 5 with the rear tire humming on the edge of physics. The data was cruelly precise. Márquez braked later by 5 meters and released pressure 0.1 seconds earlier, keeping 64% of front load while Pecco averaged 59. It looked small on paper, but on track it was an empire's difference. The GP25 responded to Marc like an echo to its source, absorbing his chaos and returning obedience. For Bagnaia, it was like witnessing a stranger play his own melody better than he could remember it. "He doesn't fight her," a Ducati engineer murmured. "She follows." Pecco stared at the screen, feeling both teacher and orphan. The metaphor cut through his mind like oil over water. The monster he built had found a new master. On track, Márquez's posture was loose, animal, his elbows carving air that seemed complicit. He understood the bike's instability as rhythm, not threat. Bagnaia, by contrast, tensed where Marc flowed, calculating where Marc believed. "I respect him," Pecco confessed later, but I hate that he makes it look easy. The GP25, meant to neutralize human inconsistency, now amplified it. Marc's madness fit the machine's logic. Pecco's logic felt obsolete. The engineers called it adaptability, but Pecco knew it was instinct, something you can't simulate. Maybe I created something too intelligent to belong to me, he thought, gripping his gloves until the seams bit into his skin. The climax came at Le Mans, when Márquez overtook him around the outside of the long right, the Ducati trembling yet obedient under impossible lean. The crowd gasped. Pecco froze for half a breath. In that instant, he saw what dominance looked like when it changed hands. No technical explanation could soften it. It was poetry written in rubber and courage. Back in the paddock, the journalists swarmed him, eager for bitterness. But his words were calm, almost reverent. Only Marc can make this bike dance. Then he walked away, shoulders heavy, not with defeat but with recognition. His own creation had outgrown him. The telemetry still glowed behind him, a pulse on the monitor, the machine alive, responsive, loyal. Just not to him anymore. The confession arrived in a whisper, barely audible beneath the hum of cooling fans and the faint metallic tick of the GP25's exhaust. I was always the best under braking, Pecco murmured, eyes lost in the monitor's glow. Now I'm the worst. Around him, mechanics pretended to adjust tools, afraid to disturb the gravity of that sentence. The data confirmed his despair. Deceleration peaks that once defined his signature now fell short by nearly 0.3 G compared to Márquez. The culprit was geometry, Ducati's new front-end stability package, shifting load forward by 2%, sacrificing the swing of the tail that had once been his secret weapon. The GP25 no longer squatted under pressure. It stood its ground, proud but unyielding. It's like trying to paint on glass, he thought, the brush sliding but never biting. The braking zone, once his cathedral, had become a battlefield against physics and pride. She doesn't dive anymore, he told Tardozzi, voice steady but eyes hollow. The new Brembo GP4RR calipers, designed for progressive modulation, made every stop predictable and sterile. The perfection he'd once begged for now felt like punishment. Each corner entry was an echo of what used to be. The late lunge, the controlled drift, the artistry of fear turned into grace. Now the bike brakes straight, obedient, unfeeling. When I release the lever, she doesn't talk back, he said, a statement that sounded more like heartbreak than analysis. His inner monologue looped endlessly. If I can't brake, who am I? The identity crisis wasn't about lap time. It was about the erosion of touch, of instinct, of the one gift that had made him invincible. Watching Márquez slide the same machine into corners with 2 fingers on the brake, Pecco felt like a ghost haunting his own legend. The metaphor surfaced, raw and merciless. A pianist whose keys have been silenced, forced to remember music through movement alone. Ducati's engineers tried everything. Smaller 340mm discs, altered master cylinder ratios, a revised anti-dive algorithm. Nothing restored the feeling. He could stop the bike, but not command it. During one practice session at Aragon, he pushed beyond logic, braking at his old markers. The GP25 refused the weight transfer, and the rear lifted violently, slamming down like a sentence. He stayed upright, but the message was clear. His style no longer fit the design. In the debrief, he stared at the telemetry, tracing his old braking points with a trembling finger. "This isn't my curve," he muttered. The room stayed silent, respectful, terrified. The climax came at Sachsenring, final lap, turn 12. He braked laid out of memory, not strategy. The front wobbled, caught, held, a flicker of the old Pecco, gone in heartbeat. He finished 4th, but the result meant nothing. That night, alone in the hotel, he replayed the lap in his mind and whispered to the darkness, "I used to be the storm that stopped others. Now I'm just the shadow that follows." The sentence dropped like cold metal on the garage floor, sharp and final. Now we have to look at Alex as the reference. Pecco Bagnaia said it without raising his voice, but everyone in the Ducati box felt the tremor beneath the calm. The statement wasn't just tactical, it was historical. The brother of his fiercest rival, Marc Márquez, had become the new yardstick for the team that once revolved around Pecco's rhythm. How did I become the one chasing? He thought, staring at Alex's name glowing at the top of the timing sheet. The data told a cruel truth. Alex was smoother through transitions, faster in low-speed corners, more adaptive to the GP25's predictive traction algorithms. Ducati's internal telemetry index, once labeled Pecco base, now red Alex mode. The engineers discussed it clinically, like surgeons commenting on a heart that beats better in another body. The betrayal wasn't emotional, it was evolutionary. He's understood how to talk to the electronics, one technician whispered, unaware that Bagnaia could hear. Pecco clenched his jaw, eyes fixed on the data lines. He speaks her new language, I still dream in the old one. The metaphor struck him as both cruel and exact, a poet replaced by a translator. Alex Márquez, with his precise throttle modulation and fearless mid-corner stability, had unlocked the GP25's logic with mathematical elegance. Pecco's instinctive flow, once the gold standard, now looked archaic. He uses less rear brake and entry, an engineer explained. It helps the software predict load earlier. Bagnaia nodded, but inside he felt hollow. The GP25 had chosen another interpreter, and it wasn't the man who made her champion. During the debrief, silence filled the gaps where pride used to live. We can learn from him, Pecco said finally, each word measured like a gear turning against resistance. Outside, cameras waited, hungry for cracks. He's improving a lot, he told them, smiling the way professionals do when they bleed privately. That night, in the hotel corridor, he watched Alex walk past, headphones on, light in his step. He doesn't know what it costs to lose a throne, Pecco thought. The numbers haunted him. Alex's corner speed up by 2 kilometers per hour, tire degradation reduced by 4%, braking phase shorter by fractions that felt like chasms. Even Gigi Dall'Igna, ever diplomatic, admitted, he's found something in the way this bike communicates. It was the final validation of a new order. The climax came during Burum's race when the radio crackled mid-lap, Alex ahead, target +0. The words hit him harder than any crash. For the first time, his point of reference wasn't the front. It was the shadow of someone else's progress. He finished 5th, barely speaking after the flag. In the debrief, he simply said, I know what we're becoming. When a journalist asked if the hierarchy was changing, he smiled faintly. Change is part of racing, he said, then turned away before his eyes betrayed him. In that moment, the world saw composure. Those who knew him saw heartbreak. The crown hadn't been stolen. It had been inherited. The sun was sinking behind the Austrian hills when Pecco Bagnaia removed his gloves, hands trembling with a fatigue that had nothing to do with speed. Around him, the paddock glowed in amber light, the smell of hot brakes and wet asphalt mixing into a perfume of endings. This was not the champion of 2022 or 2023. This was a man standing at the edge of his own legend, forced to confront evolution as an enemy wearing his old number. The GP25 no longer rewarded calculation. It demanded audacity. Marc Márquez thrived in that chaos, dancing where others calculated, fearless, fluid, feral. Pecco instead measured, questioned, hesitated. We can only adapt now, he murmured to his crew chief, watching the engineers dismantle the bike that had once been his throne. The sentence wasn't surrender. It was a threshold. The telemetry still blinked with data from the final lap, braking pressure inconsistent, corner exit delayed by 0.17 seconds, rear tire temperature 10 degrees higher than target. Numbers that told the story of a man fighting himself as much as the machine. Maybe this is what evolution feels like, he thought, when survival replaces supremacy. The GP25's algorithms had learned faster than its rider. Each race became a lesson in humility, coded into silicon. She corrects me before I move, Pecco said, half smiling, half aching. His eyes, though, carried the glaze of someone relearning what instinct means. The metaphor was silent but vivid, a king trying to rule a river that keeps changing its course. Ducati's box, once electric with dominance, now pulsed with introspection. The team spoke of adaptation cycles, data rebalancing, predictive logic. He heard only echoes. The same hands that once sculpted victories were now searching for feeling through a wall of intelligence. You're still fast, someone told him. He shook his head. Fast doesn't mean free. The 2025 season had turned into a mirror, each round reflecting the slow dismantling of certainty. Márquez conquered through chaos. Pecco sought order in noise. And yet, beneath the weariness, a quiet defiance grew. He began experimenting again, one setting at a time, trusting imperfection over precision. If I can't dominate her, I'll rediscover her, he told himself. The climax came at Misano, last corner, last lap of a meaningless Sunday. The GP25 twitched under braking, and instead of fighting it, Pecco let it slide, catching the drift by instinct alone. For a moment, the old connection returned, raw, imperfect, real. Across the line, he finished sixth, but when he entered the garage, his smile was different, small, knowing, human. "She moved with me again," he whispered, almost to the machine itself. Around him, mechanics clapped softly, unsure why it felt like victory. Outside, the sky dimmed into violet, the season's twilight mirrored in his gaze. Bagnaia understood now that the age of domination was over. The era of endurance had begun. And somewhere in that reckoning, under the soft hum of cooling engines, the rebirth of a rider began, not as a champion of power, but as a survivor of his own perfection.